In this video, we will discuss SAS macro definitions. A macro or macro definition enables you to write macro programs. So this is a syntax. So you begin with %sign macro followed by a name of the macro. So then you can put the text there and end the definition by %sign m and then name of the macro. For example, so this is a example. So I just create a macro, so I call it time. So within for the macro, so then I just have one statement. So I just want to display the current time in log window, right? See, put the current time is so percent. So this is a this time is a SAS function, SAS data step function, because we want to use it in macro facility, right? So then we just put it inside the sys function, this macro function. So this will be the format we want to display the time. Macro text can include any text, SAS statement or steps, macro variables, functions, statement, or calls. A macro call causes the macro to execute is specified by placing a %sign before the name of the macro. So can be made anywhere in a program. So it is similar to a macro variable. So it represents a macro trigger, so it is not a statement. So means no semicolon is required. So like that. For example, so like here, so this is a typical example. So first I define a macro. So then here I want to call this macro. Of course, so I mentioned for a macro call, right? So no semicolon is needed. But however, because I want to run this as a statement, right? So then you need to add a semicolon. So basically, you run this one. It is equivalent. You just run this line. So we run this one. You can see SAS just display the time here. Of course, so here we just have one statement, right? And it makes like it is silly to use a macro definition. In most cases, so when you want to use a macro statement, when you want to define a macro, so usually, so if you want to run a bunch of statements repeatedly, right? So then it is convenient to define a macro variable, and then every time, so you do not need to write those statements repeatedly. So you can just run that macro. Just call that macro. So this is a example. So macro with parameters. This is macro without parameters, right? And so you just define this macro time. So when you run it, so the %sign time. In most cases, so we will have an argument. So this is just like a function we mentioned, right? So either SAS function or macro function. So this is just like you define your own macro function. See, for this one, %sign macro. So then the name of the macro so will be my print. So this my print, so it has two argument, right? So those two argument. So this is the contents of your macro, right? You can see. So this is just a print data equals this sample and my data. So just means see my data. So this is name of the argument, right? So then SAS will interpret this as a macro variable, right? So var. So this will be the var list. See, this is the second argument and run. So this whole. And so then you end the definition by %sign m end. So then every time, so when you call it in this way, right? So you say, so first one should be name of a data set. So the second one will be the variable list. So then SAS, what SAS do is when you call this macro, so SAS see just this my data just will be replaced to will be used to replace this macro variable. right? So this variable list will be used to replace this guy. So then SAS will just run this procedure. So instead of type 3 lines, so right now you only need to type 1 line, right? Yeah, so to make it easy. Let's try to check that. See if you run this one. This does just only show you here. So the variable list, right? So I think there's another name called date, right? So you can say date space amount. Yeah. So if you run this one, see SAS will show you both, right? Yeah. So this is just a example of macro definition. Those are just some tips to develop a macro-based application. So first, so write and debug the SAS code without any macro coding. So then generalize the program by placing a hard-coded constant with macro variable references and initialize the macro variable with a percent let statement. Then create a macro definition by place the percent macro and percent mn statement around your program. Convert this let statement to macro parameters as appropriate. So what does that mean? So these are essentially the 3 steps to follow if you want to develop a macro definition. Let's demonstrate that in an example. Suppose we want to write a macro, and so this macro will add the mean of one variable to the dataset. So what do I mean? See, we have suppose we have this data by, right? So it has 2 columns. Yeah, so what I want to do is I just want to add 1 extra column. Yeah, so this extra column, the value will be the mean of amount. Okay, yeah, so this is what we want to do. Of course, there are different ways to do it, right? Yeah, so here I just use proxical. You can see I just create a table by. So so this is a name of the dataset I want to create. Of course, this by has the same name as this from. Yeah, so basically, so SAS just read the existing dataset and so write. So use the new data to overwrite the existing data. Select star. So this star just indicate every variable in the existing dataset. So then I compute the mean of the amount, right? So this value will be saved as a new variable. So with this name to the output dataset. Yeah. So then I run this one. Right. Okay. See, basically, so I have 1 extra variable, so with this name. Yeah. So this is the first step of creating this macro. As we said, so you just essentially use one data set as an example, right? So just make sure so you know how to add one mean. Just add the mean as 1 extra variable to your data set. So second step, so for all those variable, for those names, you may want to for all those names, right? So you just use let just to create a macro variable and then to make it work. Yeah, cause the things we may want to replace later, so include name of the dataset, and so also name of the variable, and or maybe also the new name for that mean. Right? See, basically for here, see I data name, right? So I just create a macro variable, so then I just let it equal to by. For the variable name, see, so then I just create a macro variable, right? So then this is the name of the macro variable. Yes. This is a name of that macro variable. So then this will be the name for that new variable, right? Yeah, so then I also create a macro. So then this is a second step. And after you finish that, I think so this is easy, right? Just for every variable you want to use, you just create a macro variable. So then you run it again, and so to make sure so your code can run smoothly without any error. Yeah, so it seems without any error. This is a warning, yeah, but it should be fine. See, it recursively references the target table, right? Yeah, so what does this mean? So this just means, as we mentioned in the proxy call, the output data and the input data are the same. Usually, so this should be avoided. Yeah, but here, so as a demonstration for to make it simple, right? So I just let them to be the same. Yeah, so this is second step. The last step just finishes this macro, right? So you just add macro, right? Yeah, so I mean the macro and m end, so in the front and in the end. Yeah, so then you write code in this way. And see, data name, var name, and min name, right? So those are the three macro variable you defined earlier. Yeah, but right now, so you just include them as argument of your macro. Yeah, so then you define the macro. You define this macro, so then you can try to run this macro, right? See, percent admin. So admin. So this is the name of the macro you define here. Admin, name of the macro you define here. When you run it, yeah, because here you ask three argument. So when you run it, you need to supply three argument, right? So they corresponding to the name of the dataset, name of the variable, and also name of the mean. So you run this one, looks okay, right? So usually, so after that, so you may want to test your code in a new function. I mean, in a new data set. For example, so let's try to find a data set. This will be a data set we used before. Let me see. Okay, yeah, so maybe let's just use this one. Yeah, so this is just a prod print data equal 1, right? So this is just a very small data, and so it has 3 rows, right? So 2 variables. So then we can try this again to see whether it works or not. So now the name of the dataset will be 1. So then we want to add the sum, add the mean of x, right? So this will be x. So then this will be x mean, right? So run that. So then you use prod print data equals 1, right? So then you run this again. Oh, what's wrong? Oh, prod print will be print. So then you run this. You run this one, this piece of code. See, you just add the mean of x, right? So usually, so after you finish your macro, so you should at least try your macro to several data to make sure they works for different scenario.